the last thing I want to do is start cutting headcount because in many ways now I have less people to help me make the company more efficient. The truth is that a budget is not necessarily an accurate reflection of whether a department or function is being well managed or is cost efficient because you could be over budget and still be running really lean, and you can be under budget and be very inefficient.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Duane Deason. Duane has spent the last 25 years helping companies manage costs and operate more efficiently. Early in his career, he launched a company that provided financial support for organizations undergoing transitions. Then, after selling his firm, Duane stepped into the role of CFO for a public company struggling to avoid bankruptcy. His efforts stabilized the company and allowed for a graceful exit through acquisition. His experience was the catalyst for Duane dedicating his career to cost management. Duane's the founder of the Efficacy Group, where he furthers the vital topic of effective cost management through speaking, training, and advising. He's a certified public accountant with an MBA from Georgetown University, the author of Operationally Svelte: Manage Costs to Increase Profit and Enhance Performance. Duane, welcome to the podcast.
Keith, thank you. I love your podcast, and I'm very happy to be on here.
Awesome. So happy to have you on. This will be a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to this. I know we have some shared values, you could say.
Outstanding.
So this will be great. So we'd love to start our podcast with a little conversation that we refer to as the spark. So I know for you that the spark for you in writing this book, perhaps, tell us a little bit about how that came to be. What is it that made you feel like I need to write a book about this stuff?
Well, if it's okay, I'm going to go in two sparks then, because I'll start with the initial spark and then what my more recent spark was, which is the latter one you referred to. My first spark was, as you mentioned in the intro, I started my own consulting practice when I was in my 20s. I sold that when I was early 30s and was CFO of a public company that was doing the Titanic after the dot-com bust. And so at a very young age, I was doing with a lot of responsibility. I found as a CFO, I was cutting a lot of costs and right-sizing the company, and I felt like I stopped that company from going into bankruptcy. And it was the spark that essentially made me fall in love with the particular aspect of helping companies become more efficient. And I think I'm ever since then, and still convinced that companies can benefit so much more by looking at themselves and running on a better, more efficient platform and be more cost effective. And I think that helps innovation, it helps growth, it helps the entire company. Then more recently, I probably had a secondary spark, if you will, of where I realized that a lot of the work I was doing, I noticed that I could leave a company 2 or 3 years after I had done a project there and clean them up and left them in what I thought was good shape and with the good fundamentals. And I could go back again and do the whole project over again. And it's almost like the lessons I had left them with, they didn't stick. They didn't have what you referred to as continuous improvement. A methodology didn't stay, or commitment didn't stay. And so I wrote this book trying to get people to understand that there is a way that they can do this themselves. In fact, it's better if they do it themselves than if bringing someone on me to do that and then leaving and then all that goes away. And also what I do now in my practice, I try to help companies build a more infrastructure and philosophy and practice that makes them into that continuous improvement, and particularly focusing on cost and efficiency.
Excellent. That's such a good lesson. I think the idea of improvements and coming and doing improvements, and then the sustainment of those improvements. I've had a lot of conversations with people who struggle with that. When you do these improvements to cost savings, I think sometimes people feel like, oh my gosh, Duane's coming in, he's going to help us cut costs. And a lot of times people's first fear is, oh my gosh, is my job safe? Does cutting costs mean that people are losing their jobs?
Well, there's two aspects to that, or two answers to that question. I think the first one is it depends when that phone call comes in, and not just to me or to anyone in my industry. If you call early, and when you're just trying to say, you know what, we're doing fine, but we can do better, that leaves a whole different set of options than when you call and say, I've got 30, 60 days of survival now, like of cash flow, and I don't know what I'm going to do after that. And all of a sudden, there's a much higher level of urgency. Both of those strategies, depending on when you called, you have to apply different strategies. If I am given my choice, of course, I'll take that earlier call. And now what you're saying is, hey, and are you after my job? Or in fact, that's the last place I go. I always want to start making the company more efficient. The last thing I want to do is start cutting headcount because in many ways now I have less people to help me make the company more efficient. I think what happens is a lot of times companies get themselves into this death spiral because they decide they want to reduce costs. The first thing they do is they cut the budget. And then no one really knows how to kind of cut the budget. So they just say, okay, well, let's just go after headcount. And so they start terminating people because they're off the books in 4, 6 weeks. And now what happens is that company is less capable of running and being more efficient and implementing important projects that would help make the company more successful. And so they start performing worse again. And now they go through layoffs again. And it starts becoming this death spiral, if you will, if you start with headcount reductions. Now, if you're in a situation and you're calling for at the last minute where you're just teetering on bankruptcy, almost everything's on the table. And now we have to make dramatic, very difficult decisions that in some cases have operational impact because you're just in that kind of a dire situation. So I would say that the earlier you call, the less disruptive it is going to be to your business. And I think the more success you will have. The later you wait to call, the more difficult the choices become.
If you're working with a new company and somebody invites you in, we say, Dwayne, come in and take a look at things. What are some of the first, things, maybe metrics, KPIs, reports? What are some of the first things that you would want to take a look at to get a sense? Like, I go to a doctor and he wants to know my weight and my height and my blood
Mhm.
pressure. What are some of those metrics for you?
Well, the first thing that I do is I take a look at where they're spending their money. And so I don't necessarily look at P&Ls, which they can be distorted by allocations and capitalization and amortization. They have so many accounting principles, and I'm a CPA by background. It can distort how a company is actually, from a cash flow standpoint, performing. And so I look at exactly what is going out the door, and that is what I try to target. What is the largest things going out and I try to prioritize and say, what can we approach here? And often it's payroll, and then I say, okay, payroll, I'm going to put a pin in that one. We're going to come back to it after I do other things that are make the company more efficient, and I keep working my way down in order to try to understand: are there any quick wins? Do I see opportunities here? And then I build confidence with the management team by finding some of those quicker wins, some of those good strategic decisions. And once we start building a little momentum, I find that the projects are much easier to kind of carry on because I have their support. Before, they might have been apprehensive. Sometimes you have department leaders that are they're used to their little silo, and they don't like someone interfering and looking under the hood of their car. And so and once I work with them for a little while and I show them that I'm there to help them and not necessarily work against them, I find that a lot more momentum can be built as a team there.
So some large companies will say, "Hey, we want to have this ongoing cost savings discipline, and we're going to just eyeball it and say we want 1% or 3% or some percentage of total cost. We want to continuously be like finding efficiencies, finding cost savings." Have you seen things like that, like rules of thumb or things that you've seen companies put into place to help just put a target for cost savings out there?
And so the first thing that I recommend, I would say structurally, a change that I recommend early, if you will, is that they consolidate their cost management efforts. So that means right now, in many organizations, they're dispersed. You have somebody managing payroll raises and compensation in one department, and usually under human resources. And human resources is not necessarily hired, and their specialty is how to control payroll costs. They were hired for their H skills or human skills. And then you have somebody working under the real estate and under operations and procurement and sourcing under a different group. I try to consolidate those and try to have one organization under a cost management center, if you will. And then from there, you take what you're talking about and you start saying, okay, now as an organization, now that we're one group, how do we look across the organization and set some goals that we think are reasonable to accomplish? And sometimes you do that through benchmarks. Competitors are operating more efficiently. How can you reach that? Or just you want to challenge yourself and how can you accomplish that? And a lot of times there's a different level of savings opportunities depending on how hard you've been focusing on certain areas. So, for example, a company may had a very good benchmarking and analysis for compensation, and so they're very good. They believe in their compensation, and maybe there's not as much opportunity in that type of thing, and maybe they haven't really focused on the technology. One of the problems I see a lot is they've gone through a lot of acquisitions, and during those acquisitions, they had a lot of products that they didn't fully integrate because they were hard to integrate, and those were the acquisition target had it very well built into their platform and their systems, and they couldn't really uproot and combine it with something that the parent company is using. And so before you know it, you have a whole bunch of different parts and engines of a company that are bolted on and work somehow working together, but not really efficiently. And so maybe there's a lot more opportunity on those. And so you can set more higher potential savings opportunities. Some of those take a long time. And so you have to kind of also measure it for not only what percentage can you get, but which ones will take longer. Some of the payroll ones actually can be very quick. Some of those longer term integration effects can take years and then have a ROI of a year or two.
What are some insights that a cost management center can give to a business about finding those cost savings opportunities?
Yes, and to start, I absolutely agree that that is a centralized group that has its own leadership and I think by doing that you have much more consistency on how you apply your approach across the company, and because of that you're much more aligned to come up with potential savings and along those lines. And I do think what you do is you benchmark. Sure, you can benchmark against other companies, always like a little bit challenging unless you have kind of a mirror industry. You know, it's even harder. You can't say you're going to mirror British Airways to Delta because they're operating in different markets slightly, and even though they're very mature airlines. So it's always tricky to do it across industries. If they're good data points, and I think you should take them, but then there's a lot of other opportunities that you can look at within your own organization to say, how are different departments functioning? Or if you're doing different products, how are they succeeding? What are their margins? And how are they improving? And how did they improve it over last year? And once you start tracking that, you get into something that's, I think, lacking a lot of companies, and it's accountability. Is that what happens is that we've gotten so careful about if I've seen so many projects that said, okay, we're going to return an ROI in this period of time, or we're going to set a goal to cut the expenses by X amount, and everyone pats each other on the back because they set the goal, and then they don't track it afterwards. And it's almost like the goal was to start the project and not really what the end point was. And so I do think that what a company has to have a clear understanding of what their endpoint is, track that endpoint and learn from that. And be accountable if you don't make that endpoint. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to terminate anyone that doesn't reach their goals or expectations, but I do think it means you have to learn from that. And if you missed, now you know next time you start something similar project, what did you learn from other projects that you've done before? Because there's some projects that they get $2 million to implement the system that's going to save $3 million. Well, they spent the $2 million, and usually it's actually ended up being closer to 2.5 by the time the project's really done, and they don't, and maybe their savings is 1 million. Well, it might still be in the long run the right idea because it creates other efficiencies or other type of thing. But now we have to understand, where did we go wrong in making that assessment up front so that we can make better educated decisions going forward. And I think when you have a cost management center that's able to apply cost savings goals, efficiency goals, and have accountability equally across all the organization, and consistently, I think you're going to end up with much better results than if you have it all dispersed throughout the organization, and some people do it well and some people don't.
So I want to take this next question towards the direction of like organizational design, organizational structure, even like org chart, right? Was there ever a time, and again, I think a lot of people that work in a company, particularly if they worked in a company for a while, like we as humans forget what it's like not to know, where it's like, this is the way we do it. Everybody kind of does it this way. But where you've gone across different companies, you probably have like in your head, like, this is how it should run. Cost management center should look like this. Have you ever gone into a company and you're like, what the heck were they thinking? How have they organized P&L. How are these guys running this business? Are there any stories like that where things were just completely surprising, like out of left field that you've seen?
Yeah, I would, and it breaks my heart to say this, but I would say the majority of them are that end of the spectrum. Then when because people think that when you lift up the hood of a car, you see a well-run engine
Yeah.
in a company, and that is not the case. And as I said before, because a lot of times because of acquisitions, you lift up that hood and you see these 4 or 5 engines that have been bolted on. It's like a Frankenstein of companies that got bolted together that move like that old day Frankenstein, slow and clumsy, and you're amazed that it's kind of working. And so that's much more the common aspect of a larger company that has done a lot of acquisitions. I would say that I would see that more often than I do. I hate to say this, but it's almost rare I see any company that's lean and mean, and usually when I do, they're much smaller, and so they just haven't lost that control yet. And then so it creates a lot of opportunity, to fix those things, but it takes a while to get those parts working and make it much more of a humming organization.
I know that I've talked to a few folks, particularly in the finance background, and I'm thinking of Nick Katko, who promotes lean accounting and is
Mhm.
always kind of saying that cost accounting, I think, where you're sharing like the cost of things, traditional manufacturing, you're creating like a standard cost,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of like always fighting against standard costing. The example that you used a minute ago, let's say there's a company that's it's grown through maybe some acquisitions. They've got different work centers, whatever industry, or maybe different locations, maybe different product lines and stuff. What are some things that come, like, if they get through that onto the other side where they should try to, think about how things are set up? Maybe it's like value stream P&Ls or something. Like, what does your recommendation look like on how they should look at their financial metrics?
Yeah. So, from that aspect, I have I disagree a little bit in that I think you could get distracted easily by trying to come up with the financial, like the traditional financial metrics of cost allocation and those type of things. You can spend a lot of time focusing on how those costs are getting allocated, and then you get into argument with the department and say, "Well, I didn't use that cost. I didn't. Why are you allocating it to me? And I don't have any control over it. And I don't know if you're doing it well. Why are you giving it to me?" And I even think that's true a little bit. So as a tool to truly make it effective P&L that managers can effectively run their companies on, I think it's tricky. And I should offer a better solution. I'm not sure I have one other than I would say that what they need to be responsible for is what they're directly spending and what they have direct control over. Now, upper management has to be responsible for the whole picture. And I even think that, and I think that's also goes down to a little bit of what people put out as a budget and say budget is the holy grail. And if I want to cut costs, just cut the budget. Well, the truth is that a budget is not necessarily an accurate reflection of whether a department or function is being well managed or is cost efficient, because you could be over budget and still be running really lean, and you can be under budget and be very inefficient. Budgets are usually based on inertia of what was last year's budget plus, we can do plus 2%, plus 3%, and maybe, and sometimes they even get political where the CTO's really close with the CEO and is able to get a 7% increase this year, and the marketing person who's in the doghouse only gets their budget cut by 2%, and it's all kind of arbitrary in that type of aspect of it. So I really like to hold people accountable for what they spend and what is actually going out the door in their name, and that includes, if they are using a factory or a part of a factory or part of an office, and for their department, even you can allocate their office space, or and the benefits for employees, but so making sure you get all direct costs related to them so that they are truly operating like they have their own business that is actually spending the money, even though they might not be the ones writing the check.
So I think this is probably an area we have some shared perspectives on how things should work, perhaps. So I've got a manager who's responsible for something in the business that has, direct outcome they're responsible for, direct costs they're responsible for, and they should manage that. I want to elaborate on this cost management center thing. What are some of the the rituals, maybe on a monthly or annual basis, that this cost management center might have with an individual manager in the business? I'm
Mhm.
responsible for a product or a team or a production line or something like that. How would
Yeah, so they absolutely should be supporting you on both of those functions, on making sure that you understand how you're spending your money. Because how can I hold you accountable if you don't understand what you're being held accountable for? So making clear that you have the accuracy of the information that's going in, and then also I do agree that the cost management center should help the managers with their budgets, because a lot of times manager, you assume that they're good at finance and budgeting, and that's usually not why they were hired. They're usually hired because they were very good at their particular role or expertise, and they can be a killer at computer science or keeping uptime and operations and all those type of things. They could be outstanding at all that. Does not necessarily mean they're good at budgeting. In fact, oftentimes they're not. And so making sure that they understand what their costs are, helping them build that up, and then making sure that they're realizing what decisions they're effectively making by adding on to the budget. If they say, well, okay, well, we can go with last year's budget. Well, that means no new initiatives. It means everything you're doing now is right. We have to kind of work through those type of things and say, here are your largest costs and what you're incurring right now. How can we do that better? What are some of your vision and initiatives that are going to make operation more efficient, make customer experience better, all those type of things, and what do you need to be successful in that way? And so I absolutely feel the cost management center has to be an advisor and support. They're not a police person to kind of hit them over the head with a stick every time that something goes wrong. They are, if something goes wrong, they mutually share responsibility because they have both missed, because you're partners in trying to manage those costs.
I like this area of focus because I think it's one that, your example, somebody who, let's say, where it's a good individual contributor in some sort of operational role, whether it's manufacturing or software, just, somebody who's good at doing the thing, they get put in as a manager, given some direct reports. They may not have had a finance class in college.
Mhm.
Now all of a sudden they're a manager and they're given like some metrics and they're said, this is your target, try to keep this number here. And they're like, okay, doing my best. And and then if they're lucky and they have like a cost management center function, somebody that can help them put together budgets next year. Maybe this is like a little role play where I come to you as a manager and I'm like, hey, I really want to get everybody on my team like a 10% raise next year. Do you think I can do that? How might you coach me to like turn that into something that it's not just like, hey, I want to increase my expenses by 10%. How do we make
Right.
that a good story to help everybody get what they want?
Right, right. Uh, what you this reminds me a little bit, because you've heard that old saying where you say you should spend the company's money like it's your own. Whenever I hear that, I tell leadership they ought to be careful what they ask for, because most people don't spend their own money very well. So how do you think they're going to spend the company's money particularly well? And I know you do run into that. You know where I run into it most, that bothers me the most? If it was about, hey, I want to give my people a 10% raise, probably not gonna happen, because, except for, some it had to be extraordinary circumstances where something like that made sense. But at least I appreciate that they're trying to look out for their people. Where I hear that argument the most often, and then it infuriates me, is I hear them asking about the consultants. They're approving a 10% raise for their consultants, and their own employees got 3. And I'm saying, you can't treat consultants better than you do your own people. What message does that send to them? And so there is a lot of coaching along those lines to basically make them real. And as soon as I realize that, or say that, and help them realize that, it's interesting that it's almost like a light bulb goes off, and they're like, wow, you're right. I'm not doing that. And so I think if you help explain to them the impact, and in this case, when the example you were giving me, a 10% raise for their employees, and I was like, well, what about the department next door? They've had a great time. Should they get 10%? And, I've been working hard, and my team, the cost management center, working hard, and we met all of our goals. Should we have 10%? You have to kind of understand the implications of your decision and what it means for the rest of the organization. You're part of something larger than your particular department. Um, and I find that if you invest a little bit in educating management, it actually goes quite well. Even I believe from a culture standpoint, you have to educate your entire organization on how on a greater culture of fiscal awareness, or and because waste and inefficiency is just as contagious as being efficient and spending your money well. So you can have one or the other, and they're both contagious. So might as well get the organization to understand how to spend money well, and you do that by rewarding employees for with bonuses or recognition for when they do things that make the company more efficient or save the company money. Cut the leadership sometimes wants to do extravagant things for their employees. I had one company that loved to throw this very extravagant party for all employees, flew them all to a single city, had world class entertainment, and I explained to him not only the waste, or don't forget it, but I'm
Yeah.
beyond the waste is that what message are you sending to employees? You're telling your employees that the company is extremely wealthy and doesn't have to worry about expenses. Do you think next time they're trying to worry about whether they should take their team out to a steak dinner or want that 10% raise you mentioned earlier? Do you think they're going to think twice about that because they've just been on this extravagant, I'll call it vacation, but retreat that told them that they really didn't have to worry about those type of things?
Thing. So let's take this to like a level of maybe there's an individual project that
Mhm.
at the bottom. Maybe we've had a conversation and I'm like, "Hey, we need to do this, some sort of investment of some kind." Maybe it's a piece of equipment or maybe it is sending some people to a training or something,
Yeah,
something that's going to require some budget. And I come to you and I say, "Duane, I really feel strongly that we need to do this because it's going to help us in so many ways." How might you coach me through the business case or how do I um, present this story so that the expense is something that somebody can say yes to? Because I know the problem is when these things are just presented as a cost, somebody's like, well, no, we don't want to just spend money. But what are some of the benefits that spending this money might help us generate for the business? I think that's an area that sometimes people fail to present, and I think that there's a lot of good opportunities that companies miss out on because they only have half the story. They only have like, this is what it's going to cost us, and there's
yeah,
not a good,
yeah.
you know,
And that's exactly right. It's getting them to think about what is going to be the return. It's an investment. Everything, all these are investments. You're spending money on investments, and what is going to be the return on that? And let's take a couple of your scenarios. Let's say that they just wanted to send a few employees to training. Okay, are we going to be able to maybe use some consultants less because now we have a greater expertise in house? I'm very interested in that conversation. Is it going to mean that we can implement the system on our own, or start managing it on our own over because instead of outsourcing it or something? So I'm interested in understanding what is going to create that return. And sometimes I guess you can get defensive in the sense that you have to send them just because you have to keep current on the latest technology and the studies, those type of things. I tend to think you can do that without sending away for training type of things. But I think it's making sure they understand what is going to be the return on that investment and how to present that. And the more money they're going to spend, the more clear and accurate that presentation has to be. So on your other kind of example was, let's say it's a piece of equipment. And we think that this piece of equipment is much more valuable to the company because although it's going to cost 2 million up front, we're gonna be able to reduce our production costs by 3%, per year. Okay, well, let's math that out. How long does it take to recover that? And try to understand that aspects of it. Are we going to have to make that change anyway because the old piece of equipment's obsolete and not being supported anymore? Try to make the business case that says that this is why it makes sense for this company. In fact, this is why you can't afford not to do it because this is what will be lost if we do not take this action. And make sure that it's really clear on what that is, and understand that when you make those statements, you are now accountable for the outcome. So if we don't reach that 3% productivity savings in production, then we have an issue because we made a poor decision based on the information that you provided. And so I think when you hold people and tell them that you're going to hold them accountable, they sharpen that pencil and get much more accurate in what they ask for. And sometimes they realize when they're doing that it's, there's too much risk here. Can't really assure that we're going to get this, and maybe I shouldn't be asking for it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't take some risks in the aspects. In fact, I think taking risk is important, but we should understand what they are. They should be measured, understood, and calculated so that we know when we make a decision what the risks are involved, and we're willing to accept the range of outcomes.
Yeah, that's an interesting area of you called it an investment. So like, ROI, return on investment.
Yeah.
A lot of these expenses are whether you call them costs or investment, finding the return on the other side, I think is the thing that needs to be validated. So we work with a lot of continuous improvement people where they are going through this evolution where they're learning this discipline, they're learning structured problem solving. One of the things that we advocate people in this discipline of continuous improvement, whether it's a continuous improvement manager or director, is to do some of this financial analysis. And again, a lot of these people don't have the years of experience. One of the bits of advice that we would have is, hey, find who the cost management center is inside your organization, the finance people. If I'm trying to find an advocate or a friend in finance to help me figure out some of this stuff, and my background's more in, let's say, manufacturing operations, what are some of the job titles that I might want to talk to in the organization to say, hey, could you help me figure out how to, help my department?
Under the right direction. So I would love to be able to say you should go straight to the cost management center, but it's a relatively new concept, and I'm not sure many organizations have something that dedicated. And so I think usually I go one of two places if you had a new project that you wanted to explore. One of them outside of finance, and it can be included within finance, but often outside of it is like a PMO, a project management organization, and a lot of larger companies have PMOs and they assign somebody who has an expertise on how to manage projects, how to help, and that includes upfront how to build the business case and those type of things. And they stick with you throughout the entire process. The other one is within probably FP&A, financial planning analysis groups, kind of budgeting type of groups of trying to say, I want to get this in the budget. And a lot of times they will require the business case in order to do that. That it's someone who doesn't know how to build a business case, they can help provide some guidance in that. And there's different FP&A groups. I've seen some that are larger into they could overthrow small governments. They're and I've seen others that are actually quite lean and so they don't give as much support. So it ranges on what when you go to an FP&A, what level of support you'll get. And then what I love right now is lean on AI. AI, and if you go to Claude and you put in the scenario and what you're trying to do and it can help you develop. It would be very good at an ROI type of analysis. It's certainly, and so you come to whether it's the finance person, whether it's the PMO, and you come to them with a much better organized. And when you come to them with a more clear vision and thought out, you get a whole different level of attention and you're taken much more seriously than when you come to them and say, I've been thinking. So there's some very good tools now that we didn't have just 5 years ago that you can lean on.
That's so true. Yeah, there's some really good ones in there. You touched on something. We talked about budgets. Budgets are such an interesting thing because in some companies, the budgets are like
Mhm.
they're this very sacred thing, and there's some not great behaviors that I would just describe as use it or lose it.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
when it comes to budgeting, are there? Can you think of any examples of either maybe like abuses or bad behavior in a use it or lose it type organization?
Yeah, and it could break my heart, but it's actually the federal government is that. So they have an appropriation period that is, that if you don't spend the money that they've allocated by the end of the government fiscal year, which is September 30th, essentially that you won't get that budget the following year. You can give it back to the government, but now they're going to cut it the following you don't it's gone forever and the chances are you'll now have a new budget that's reduced by that amount the following year. And you see a lot of government contractors get caught up in that mix because what happens is that towards the end of the year, they've got to spend a certain amount of money. And so they just start flooding opportunities to government contractors, and they don't have enough time to really put together very effective proposals to make an efficient use of the funds. And so it's a mess. And so I would say it's a terrible way that use aspect of it. And that's one of the reasons I tried to preach that that budgets are not necessarily a reflection of efficiency. They are tools, and I think they should continue to be used. But if they're not done properly, they can distort the appearance of a performance, a financial performance. I think the only type of budget that I makes sense to me is what they call kind of a zero-based budget, which is where basically you start with a budget of zero every year, and you have to try to justify all costs to build it back up. And that makes you think about what you're going to spend in each circumstance. The worst type of budgets are the ones that basically say we're going to take last year's and we're just going to add X percent, and this is your new budget, and good luck. And whenever you do that, you're just not necessarily you're creating any sort of efficiency by doing something like that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic because there's tensions in both directions. You know, as a manager, a owner of this fiefdom, you want a budget, you want to retain it, and then I think it is one of those examples where you get the behaviors that you reward
Hmm.
in an organization, kind of from a
Absolutely.
cultural perspective. And we talk about cost savings. Sometimes, I've heard people use this idea that like the budget is the budget, and a cost savings is something that was maybe in the budget that you were able to avoid
Hmm.
spending. I think that's a fine line also because if you've got money budgeted for, let's say, marketing and sales where that expense creates the revenue and you
Hmm.
don't spend that money and you don't get the revenue, that's not a good example of savings.
That's right.
But, maybe finding a better way to get the materials for something that you need without sacrificing costs or something, that might be a good example. Yeah, are there any like best practices or things that you would share around either identifying savings or budgeting that people might be able to, you know?
But yeah, I think what I notice a lot because I help companies save money a lot, and when I walk in there, usually they've had their budget, and I could care less what their budget is, but when they do, because they're told they have to kind of meet it or not meet it, and if I help them save money, there's now all of a sudden there's this opportunity. What do? Do they come in under budget? And do they spend the money, instead? And so I think they look at it as a little bit of an opportunity to say, "Wait, if I have this extra money that we just saved over here, instead of having to just forfeit it and walk away and not do anything with it, can I use it for something that is actually very productive?" Now, if you're just going to throw it at something and not even really know if it's going to really help the company, now you've just wasted that money. And I don't think that's obviously not the right solution. But I do think when you save money in one place, you should look to the opportunity and say, what is the best use of this capital? Sometimes it's to return it to the shareholders. And so you do save it and you just get, sometimes you reduce debt with it, but sometimes you reinvest it into the business and try to make the business expand and beat your expectations of what you're originally trying to accomplish. So there's a range of things when you have the opportunity of when you've reduced certain costs and it's regardless of now you can say, okay, well, I want to be under budget. I think you've missed the point. The point is that what you want to be is you want to run a very efficient department that is maximizing its return for the company. And now if you have this extra money, what's the best way to do that? And if you can't find an efficient way to do it, then absolutely returning it is the right way to do it. If you can find an efficient way to do that, to make a better productivity or efficiency or other intangible aspects of it, make the case and use it.
Yeah, I'm trying to. We had a conversation one time, and this idea of spend it or lose it was kind of like the paradigm. And he had suggested kind of this idea of save it and share it. I'm wondering if you've ever come across examples where people can be incented for making good decisions with their budget as opposed to falling into that, the spend it or lose it. Have you seen companies that have been able to take those savings, those excesses, those profits or whatever, and come up with a good way of allocating those to projects, maybe putting something out to the company to say, "Hey, we wanna spend this money in this way. What ideas do you have?"
Yeah. Yeah, no, so what I usually see and I does you do remind me of one of the things that I try to encourage companies to do is to have like whenever a savings or something is found by an employee from their own initiative or sometimes as a couple of employees from their initiatives is that I reward them with a little bit of that savings. They give them a bonus, give them recognition, and then tell the rest of the company what happened, so that you're educating the rest of the company from that. But then the other 99%, the main part of it is what can you do with that extra capital? And I think a very mature management team they come together and they say, okay, on a monthly basis, we were able to come under budget this department by X and this other, and we're running a little bit better than expected. What can we do with this capital in order to try to make the business better? And in some cases, it's giving it to another department because the company and the management team agree that that would advance that has the greatest chance of advancing the company's mission and goals. And so I think if we can get away from the point where we're siloed and we think this is my budget and I really don't want to give anything up and I want to protect my territory, I think that's a short run game. If we can make sure we realize we're part of a larger organization that trying to work with the other groups that may or may not need more capital and may sometimes give you more capital that you might need, then I think you're going to have an organization that works much more effectively.
Are you struggling to ignite real change in your continuous improvement program? Firestarter is your field guide. Real stories, proven strategies, no fluff. Get it now on Amazon. I want to ask you about the idea of hard savings versus soft savings when it comes
hmm
to like cost savings. Do you have like an
I,
explanation that you could share with people about what hard savings versus soft savings might be?
Yeah, and I think that there are definitely different types of savings, and I think there's more categories than just hard and soft. Even I would say there's so the but the base aspect of it is that I give example of a hard savings being something where we paid 10 cents an item for this last year, and this year we're paying 9. Okay, clear hard savings that it's for the exact same item. We got a penny savings per item. So that's a hard. I call that hard savings. One might, like a softer savings would be that cost. Inflation is 3% this year, and we were able to get no increase in cost. Well, we would expect it at 3%. So is that a savings because we were able to avoid the inflation or inflationary adjustment? It becomes softer in that aspect of it. But there's a lot of other tricky aspects of that all savings are not equal. So for example, if most companies are much more interested in cutting operational costs than CapEx, because CapEx costs are capitalized and they hit below EBITDA. And so if you're hitting a OpEx one, it shows up as it helps your EBITDA and makes the company look a lot better. So if I saved $1 million in OpEx and $1 million in CapEx, the CFO is going to be much more excited about the OpEx aspect of it, that type of thing. He'll take both, but it is a different level of pursuit and interest if it's operational oriented type thing.
Dwayne, one thing I like to do here with our podcast is make sure I explain some of the jargon that we use. So could you just explain a little bit like what OpEx is versus CapEx and how that
Sure.
might affect
Yeah.
decision
Uh,
making?
OpEx, it just goes in, it's operational costs, essentially. It's items that basically go above, and I'm going to use that other term, EBITDA, which is earnings before income taxes, depreciation, and amortization. The reason that line is important is that investors tend to look what is EBITDA. For whatever reason, investors tend to look at that as the real income versus net income. It's just one of the big metrics. X, which is operational costs, goes above the EBITDA line, and CapEx, which is like things like a piece of equipment. It's something tangible that's usually allocated to many years. It's depreciated over many years, and those costs usually go below the EBITDA line. And so you really want to have costs come out of the above the EBITDA line because it helps with investor analysis and their opinion of your profitability of your company. Is that I hope that clears and doesn't muddy the water more.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking of like a personal life example, like, the money that you pay for rent, operational cost, the
Yes.
money that you pay for a house, like you may pay for the whole thing in a year, but
Yes.
you're going to pay for it over time.
Yeah.
And
And I'd even say like another CapEx one, might be like a car. Because a house can be an investment because it actually
yeah,
increases in value. Where a car, a depreciating asset. But the key is that you shouldn't be hit for that entire expense all in one year because that car is going to last you 7 years, and so you really if you should be hit one out of 1/7 of it every year in order to properly allocate the cost of that car, the type of thing. Now, as a cost guy, I care that you paid for the whole car. Because that's what's coming out of the checking account. But from an accounting standpoint, and they appreciate more that OpEx because if that cost of that gets 100% of that comes out right away and is above the EBITDA line, where the car aspect of it, 1/7 hits below the EBITDA line and it's less important anyway. So it's if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know that with accounting, there's a handful of these little, whether it's, double entry, but, there's a lot of these little things that
I
are
wish it was
kind
just
of
a
like,
handful.
yeah, yeah, you can kind of get caught up in, cash versus accrual and gap versus, there's so many of these little nuanced things. Yeah, I'm curious if there's any like common misconceptions that you find yourself maybe having to explain to managers. I'm like, well, no, actually, this is how we think about things in finance.
Yeah. Well, the things that I guess I try to explain to management more is that aren't so much concepts of finance that I have to kind of that I have to get into. I think it's that there's this myth that cutting costs impacts growth and innovation. And I very much disagree with that aspect of it. I think cutting costs and making a company more efficient and more lean is enhances performance, enhances innovation. And I'll give you the example is that that's why startups, if you look at startups, they're able to do so much innovation and creativity on very low funding. If you took that same startup team, those same individuals, and you put them into one of those big behemoth companies and you flooded them with funding, their productivity and their innovation would plummet. There's an efficiency about running lean and without all the organizational bloat, and that is very impactful. I think one of the big things that I spend time trying to teach companies is that cutting costs is not going to slow growth, innovation, and performance. It's actually a catalyst to all three of those.
That's a very good point. Well, Dwayne, I'd like to go into a little section here called the rapid fire. These are just some kind of quick questions and phrase, word, sentence
Okay.
kind of answer here. So, the most important job of a leader is to blank.
I would say set an example for their employees.
Do you have a favorite like go-to problem-solving tool, maybe a certain spreadsheet template that you find yourself using more than anything else?
I like Claude. I've been using Claude a lot, and it's the equalizer to a lot of the big companies. They're using the same tool I am now, and so I'm equal to them because AI enables that.
In addition to your own book, which you're welcome to plug right now, is there another book that you recommend to our audience?
I thank you, and I will advocate for my own book, operationally spelt, because I just think I wrote it for people to be able to self help, if you will, on how to manage costs. I really liked a book called Latent Vector that helped me understand the dramatic changes that AI can bring about. I thought I had a good understanding of what AI would change, and I thought that it really gave me that longer term major disruption that in 5+ years we could have. And written by a gentleman named David Habib, who I worked with for a little while. I just thought it's very quick read, but it makes a great case how everything could change, particularly from a cost management standpoint. Now, a lot of the strategy within procurement is to do longer term agreements because you get cheaper product by committing for longer term. And the premise is that so much is going to change and so quickly that you really ought not be locking your companies or your clients into longer term agreements.
That's probably some good advice right now. Finish this sentence. Continuous improvement is.
The opportunity to make a company more productive, efficient, and innovative.
Well, thank you. Do you have a favorite question? Is there a question that you turn to frequently in your work?
Yeah. Yes. What value are you receiving for this cost for this effort?
That's a great one. Really good question. What's something that you're fired up, excited about currently?
I'm fired up about the idea that AI can be a game changer in my particular area because so much of it is not done well, and I think AI can really help it and be a catalyst to giving out better, whether KPIs, better accountability, all those aspects of it. So I could see another 5 years AI being really making a big difference in my particular field.
Interesting. Um, in your, in your role, in your position as somebody advocating for cost management, is there something that you feel like sometimes people have a misperception about, or like a belief about what cost management is that you need to overcome?
Absolutely. That cost management will hinder an organization and make it grow slower. so that it will actually hurt an organization's in some ways, not just help an organization. Kind of overcoming that myth really helps, is really important.
That's a good one. And last one here. Do you have tell us a prediction about AI, how it's going to change things in your world, like 12 months from now? What do you think is a bold prediction that
I think it won't be too long before you can basically have AI monitoring what's going on within the organization and find opportunities and it won't always be right. It'll come up with KPIs that it just observes over time that you didn't even know you were a it was a KPI you should be keeping an eye on. And then it not only will it keep an eye, it start creating them, it will start letting you know when you deviate from those KPIs in real time. So I think that AI has the opportunity to make us run so much more efficient and really release our creativity, allow us as people not to get caught up in the mundane of work that really isn't the value add, but to be allow us to become more strategic in how we approach our jobs.
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, Dwayne, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Really appreciate your time and sharing your experience and insights and stories. Would you like to share a website or contact information with our listeners here?
Keith, this has been great. I actually really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you for having me on this. My website is efficacygroup.com, FFICACYGROUP.com. And on there, I have on my blog, I have a small podcast, which I focus on strictly cost management on that, and some articles and a little bit about myself and my book. And so if I invite people to take a look and hope we get a chance to revisit this conversation. It was a lot of fun.
That would be awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks. Thank you, Keith.
You bet. And for our listeners, if you'd like to suggest a guest, ask a question, give us any ideas for episodes, you can reach out to me, Keith Norris, on LinkedIn. Feel free to add a comment in the socials, etc. And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you have enjoyed the episode, be sure to add a comment, like, follow, subscribe on all the socials, and share the podcast with friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. And until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change. This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all-in-one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise-wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com.